Okay, well, fantastic. Hey, welcome back, everyone. Uh, Before we get into tonight, let me just kind of do a recap because it's been a while and there was a lot of stuff that happened right before we went on break. And so let me just provide a recap. There's a couple things that happened. Number one, remember we had 3 Sabbath controversies. Do you remember that? We spent a lot of time walking through the Sabbath controversies. We had the man that was healed by the pool of Bethesda on the Sabbath and a high holy day, right? We had the man with the withered hand, right, that had been healed on the Sabbath. We also had the disciples eating grain on the Sabbath, right? So we have those 3 Sabbath controversies. And after those Sabbath controversies, the Pharisees and the religious leaders decided that they put a plan together. They started concocting a plan to kill Jesus. That's what it said. So he's still fairly early in his ministry, right? Maybe up to a year or so at this time. It's hard to tell exactly, but maybe somewhere around there. And they're already plotting to kill him because he has broken their Sabbath laws. Remember, not God's Sabbath laws. He didn't break any of God's laws. He only broke the Pharisees' laws around those 3 Sabbaths. And in his defense of himself against the charges of breaking the Sabbath, remember, he provided several very definitive defenses of himself, not only as the Messiah, but also as whom? God. He made explicit claims of deity, which really threw them off. That's why they plotted to go out and try to find a way to kill him. So we spent all of that time. The other thing that happened because of those events and some other ones that happened before, but particularly the man with the withered hand. Remember, that's the last event that we talked about that happened in the synagogue. And he was a plant. Remember, he was a plant by the Pharisees to see whether or not Christ would actually heal the man. Well, Christ did. Christ healed the man with the withered hand. And because of that event and all the other miracles he had done, it said that Christ could no longer walk without being crushed. Like he literally couldn't go any place without the crowds making it almost impossible to breathe. So he'd have to get out into a boat or do whatever else, right? So his fame has spread not only to Israel, but outside of the land to the point where it's impossible for him to even just go outside of a house, right? Without just being thronged by the multitudes. So we have the religious leaders who have thoroughly rejected him and want to kill him. We've got the crowd that is still enthused with him, right, at this point because of what he's able to do. And next week, we're going to come to a really critical junction, which is the Sermon on the Mount. And so I'm just going to prep you for that one. I want to have you think about this question. What is the purpose of the Sermon on the Mount? Why did Christ give it? Right? Why did he give that sermon at this point and not some other point? Right? So hopefully when we get to next week, we'll answer that. But there's some things that are colliding here. We've got the rejection of him by the religious leaders. We've got the throngs of crowds that are after him, going after him. In some of them in belief, and some of them just to see if he'll do another really great thing for him. And this is all going to come to a head, which will lead us to the Sermon on the Mount. Okay, as it's more commonly called. But before we get there, if you remember correctly, up till this point in his ministry, Jesus had selected how many disciples do we know of at this point?
70-something.
No.
No.
Well, there's that. Let's put it this way. There were probably thousands of people that were his disciples, people that believed in his message or whatever else. But the actual like disciples that we know that are named that he has called, no, not 12. We only have 6. Very good. Thank you. Thank you. The guy not in the front row. No, it wasn't even my dad. It was Bob. No. Yeah. 6. So up to this point, there's 6 of them that we know by name. There's hundreds or thousands of them probably at this point that we don't know by name. And what we're going to do right here at this point is we're going to get to the selection of the final 6 so that we'll have an actual group of 12, not just disciples, but apostles. Christ will have hundreds or thousands of disciples, but only 12 apostles. That's what we're going to talk about today. Yes.
Is there significance to the number 12?
Yes. Yeah, there is. And we'll get into that, but yeah. Okay, so yeah. So any questions? It's kind of a recap or setup to where we're at for tonight. Okay. All right. Well, hopefully, you know what this thing does every time. All right. So again, we are still in part 4, which is the authority of the king. This is the section where he is demonstrating his authority as the Messiah. And we've gone through all of these different ways in which he has done that. Next week, we'll get to his authority to interpret the law. So that gives you a little bit of a clue about what the Sermon on the Mount is really about, right? But for this week, it's going to be the choosing of the 12. He has the authority to choose those who are his apostles, who are going to be the ones that are sent, who will become the foundation of the new entity called the church. And that will be what we're going to look at tonight. All right, there's 2 accounts of this. The first one that we have is in Mark. And again, the highlights, the yellow highlight is where there's some differences between those 2. So again, as we're looking at these accounts in parallel, you can actually tell that there are some things one author adds that the other doesn't. So Mark says this, he says, and he went up on the mountain and called to him those whom he desired, and they came to him. And he appointed 12, whom he also named apostles, so that they might be with him, and he might send them out to preach and have authority to cast out demons. He appointed the 12 Simon, to whom he gave the name Peter, James the son of Zebedee, and John the brother of James, to whom he gave the names Boanerges, that is, sons of thunder, Andrew and Philip and Bartholomew and Matthew and Thomas and James the son of Alphaeus and Thaddeus and Simon the Zealot and Judas Iscariot, who betrayed him. All right. Now in Luke's account, I'm just going to read the part that's a little bit different. When he went up into the mountain, what did he do? He went to the mountain to pray, and all night he continued in prayer to God. And when day came, he called his disciples and chose from them 12. All right. That's the account that we have here. So again, just setting the picture. He's done these miracles and stuff, and the crowds are just thronging on him. So what does he do? He finds the time, probably late at night after sundown, and goes up to the mountain because there isn't any place he can be alone. Like he cannot find, I mean, he's like living with a whole bunch of people, and there's he's sleeping on somebody else's bunk with them or whatever else. I mean, he needs time alone. So he goes to the mountain to pray. And so that's what's going on here, is he's trying to get away to talk to God. All right. So the first thing is that you asked, Gray, if there was anything symbolic about the number 12. And of course, the Bible is full of numeric symbology, right? You've got the 3 being the triunity. There's also other different 3s in the Bible as well. You've got 7, you've got 12, right? You've got 40. We've talked about 40 a lot. Like 40 is a symbol of testing, right? Throughout scriptures. And in this case, the 12 tribes of Israel is what is the basis for the choosing of these 12 disciples. So just as Israel was divided up into 12 groups, 12 tribes based off the 12 well, 13, but we won't get into that. Sons of Jacob, how that was done with his 2 sons. We now have these 12 disciples that are representative of that structure. Now, why God decides to do 12? Why did Jacob have 12? I don't know. I don't know why God decided 12 and not 14. But that's the pattern that he goes with. And in this case, Jesus himself follows that same pattern and says, when I'm going to establish a new entity. So remember, the new entity in the Old Testament was Israel, based off of the 12 sons of Jacob. We now have a new entity that isn't yet, the church is not established yet. But when Jesus is rejected, he will now start talking about this new entity, the church. That will now be based off of 12 as well. In this case, it's going to be the 12 apostles. And this is what Lack says in his rabbinic commentary. He says, the choice of 12 as a number is clearly symbolic, representing the 12 tribes of Israel. The number was retained even after the betrayal of Jesus by Judas Iscariot, whose place was taken by Matthias. So his point here is this, is it wasn't just like, I don't know, there's like 12 people that I really trust and they're my group of people. No, there was 12 picked for a reason. And when Judas died, they filled the spot. Now they could have said, well, I got 11. I mean, Judas was bad, but why don't we just keep 11 now? I mean, if it's just about who was going to be loyal or who you could trust, you would have kept it at 11. But no, the church decided at that point, we have to fill his role as an apostle to make that number 12 complete. That makes sense? That's what Lack's point here is in that first quote. Now, again, that.
They're one of the 12 tribes that betrayed God. Like, is there a parallelism between the tribes and the, no?
No, I mean, they all betrayed him. That's the reason why they all went into either Assyrian captivity or Babylonian captivity. I mean, they all did. I mean, they all rejected him. And in the desert, you had the 12 tribes in the desert, and look what happened to them, that generation. So there isn't anything that I can see as a correlation between one specific tribe. Now, that process was going up to the mountain. Here's what Christ did. He says, look, I got to get alone because I got a major decision. Now, think about this. We just look back at it as the apostles. We know who they are, right? You got Matthew, right? You've got John, you got James. We know who they are. But Christ is going to choose 12 men to be apostles, upon which his church is going to be built and sent out into the world to accomplish the Great Commission. Like, this is, if you're, look, Pete Carroll just lost his job yesterday, right? And everyone's like, oh, who's going to be the next coach, right? Like John Schneider, he's got a decision. Who am I going to put in that spot? Because you're following the greatest coach ever in Seattle history, pro, and I would even argue college. So John Schneider's got to find the right person. Jesus has got to find the right people for that. So he doesn't just pray a little bit. He goes up to the mountain, and what does it say? It says he prays all night for that decision. And in the morning, when all the crowds start looking for him again, where's this Jesus guy? They go to the mountain, they find him there. His disciples all follow him, and it's not just the 12. It's not just, in this case, it's not just the 6. It's many of them, because he has to then select from the disciples that come up there who are now going to make up that core of 12, right? So that's his process. He goes up there, secluded, prays, because the importance of this decision will impact the future of the church, right?
What were the main requirements?
The main requirements for apostle is someone that had been with or seen Christ or had interaction with him. So in other words, the apostle Paul calls himself, he's a late to the game guy. But the reason why he qualifies is because he encountered Christ on the road to Damascus. So that was, an apostle was one that was, we'll kind of get into that here in a little bit. But you had to be called, right? And an apostle is different than a disciple, which we'll get to in just a moment. But that was their criteria. They had to have been with Christ, had to have been called out and appointed, not just, hey, I'm an apostle. Like, anyone could be a disciple, but only 12 could be the apostles. And then Paul is added in as a Johnny come lately because of his interaction with Christ and his saving act on the road to Damascus. All right. So they all come up, his disciples, and I'm assuming the crowd is coming with, because he hasn't been able to go any place, the previous verses have said, without a throng around him, like literally can't walk. So they all find him. He's up here in this mountain. And it says, and he appointed 12, whom he named apostles. And this is what Mark says. Why did he call them to be apostles? Hey, what's the big deal? I'm the Messiah. Like, why do I need apostles? What is the purpose of the calling? Right? It's not just that they're called, but what's the purpose? Well, he gives the purpose statement, which is that they might be with him and he might send them out to preach and have authority to cast out demons. So the first one is that he would have his disciples with him at all times. Now, prior to this, the 6 disciples that he's named have not necessarily been with them all the time. They've got day jobs. They're still fishing, right? They haven't become fishers of men full time. They're still fishing. They still got a day job, right? So they'll follow him around, but they have not been called to be with him full time. This is the call to full-time ministry, to leave what you've got and follow, right? So he wants them so that they can be with him at all times, right? Okay. Now, Jesus is going to have lots of disciples. In fact, Rich, you mentioned the 70, and that's just the 70 we know that he sent. You know, there's many, anyone who put their faith in him as the Messiah and followed him would be called a disciple, right? But these are 12 special disciples, right? Now, just think about this for a second. Sometimes we forget the humanity of Christ and we think of only the deity. Why would he want to do this? I mean, why would anyone want to do this? He's a Messiah. He's God. I mean, he doesn't really need anything, to be honest with you. He can ask God and God will give him anything. Why do you want to surround yourself with 12 brothers?
Creating work.
You can delegate work.
Those 12 can do it, then so can all of us.
And if you look at the ragtag group of men, absolutely.
Protection community.
Community. That's actually what I was looking for. I was looking for that because he's going to go through some things. In particular, you see that in the Garden of Gethsemane, right? Where he's basically, his sweat is like drops of blood, the agony that he goes through. He needs people that he can count on for community. Like if the Messiah needs people that he can say, I got 12 buddies. I got 12 people that I can count on, right? If he needs that to go through life for his ministry, we do as well. So he's actually it's not only practical for him, but he's demonstrating to us that you can't be a lone ranger, right? You're not the solo Christian that stays at home and watches TV on the internet and then never has any, I mean, look, there's nothing wrong if you want to stay home and watch the sermon on the internet. Don't get me wrong. I've done it many times, right? Especially since COVID. My point is that no one here is a Christian by themselves, right? And if the Messiah needs that community, then the rest of us need that as well. Okay, so that's
Isn't he preparing them for something though?
he is.
And he's training them, and you know he's leaving. You know eventually he'll leave.
Yep.
And I mean you know the story. So I mean this is like almost to me like a boot camp. Like a Jesus boot camp.
Yes. So not only is it for that, but you're right. In fact, we're going to have a session specifically on the training of the 12. But you're right.
He's going to give them the same authority.
Exactly right. And so when he leaves, because he knows they don't know he's going to leave. They think he's going to establish the kingdom. He's going to be sitting on a throne. They're going to be sitting on thrones next to him. And they're going to be just, loving it up and eating banqueting. That's right. Someone's going to be feeding them grapes. That's what they think. He knows that this ride's going to end here and you're going to have to carry on. So again, I go back to the coaching philosophy. Like Pete Carroll has a coaching philosophy, always compete. Like when he's gone now, is that team still going to always compete? Has he drilled into them what they need to know, how they need to operate, how they need to think in life? And so you're right, Rich. Part of that is going to be for their training, right? But part of it is also for his community. Yeah, great.
So Jesus did not have omniscience, right? So he wouldn't have known that Judas was going to betray him.
Yeah. Okay. Well, when you say Jesus is the technical term for the God-man.
Jesus in his humanity.
Jesus in his humanity did not. Jesus in his deity, because Jesus only existed at the incarnation. Before then, he was the Son, right? So Jesus only exists at the incarnation. At the incarnation, though, now you have the deity that's always existed, the Son, with now the human nature combined. And in his human nature, he didn't know everything. In fact, he even says, only the Father knows the hour of my coming. So in his humanity, he didn't. In his deity, he did. Now, I can explain later on how I think about the divine omniscience and human understanding when we're done, and I can kind of give you an idea. I think I've showed a few of you the idea of the napkin and pulling it through, and there's some ways around it. But in his humanity, he didn't. So in his humanity, if the deity part of him does not inform the humanity side, and again, this is going to blow your minds about how this works, then he needs to pray. Because otherwise, why would you pray? There's no reason to ask the Father for guidance if you already know. So there's it's getting kind of way off path here, but he did need to pray in order to know exactly which one of the 12 he needed to choose for. I mean, I think he probably had an idea, but
Didn't Jesus look at Judas like with knowing eyes, say, hey, do what you gotta do, like,
yeah.
go. So, I mean,
Yeah, I'm not saying that when he chose him that he didn't know that he was choosing the traitor, because he knows he's going to have to be betrayed in order to be delivered up. So I'm not saying that he didn't know that. Like all of a sudden he's sitting around at the table and he's like, the Last Supper, and he's looking around thinking, wait, I'm going to be betrayed. He's trying to figure out like which one of the 12. No, not at all. So if your question was about that,
it could be that in his prayer, where God the Father was guiding him to make the choice of the disciples, God might have revealed to him the purpose for bringing on a disciple who he knew.
yeah. I mean, we don't know how it happened, but we do know that he knew about Judas before Judas betrayed him. So
He was aware of the purpose.
yes, because he knew that. Yeah. All right. So, anyway, to be with him at all times, and it says that he sent him out to preach. Now, remember, what is he preaching? This is pre-break here. What was the message of what he was preaching?
that the Messiah, the Messianic king was coming.
Actually, well, that the Messiah is here. The Messiah is here, and the Messianic king, the Messianic kingdom is available to you if you will accept him. I mean, that's what he keeps on. That's what the message has been all along. It isn't about his death and believing in him for salvation based off of his substitutionary atonement. It's not based off of that. That hasn't occurred yet.
Same message that John was giving.
Same, very good. You paid attention.
It's the same message that John was giving.
Yeah, same message, the same message. The kingdom of heaven is at hand, and the Messiah is Jesus Christ. So they're going out to preach that, right? That's part of what and of course, he's going to send them out, Rich, to your point, 70. And we'll talk about why 70, right? Because there are 70 cities that they needed to prepare, and we'll get into that. I'm just giving you a little hint. It wasn't because there was only 70, it's because there were 70 cities that needed to be prepared for him during his journey back up to Jerusalem for his death. So that's why 70 and 35 cities with 2 disciples each. All right, get my math straight here. The third thing is, and that should be a 3, to have authority to cast out demons, right? So up to this point, his disciples, they're just tagging along. Like they're like literally they're not doing anything at this point. Now he's called them because he's going to give them power and authority over demons. Now, originally, it was only given to the 12 apostles. It will be expanded later on in the New Testament. And of course, this is going to be important because Satan's work in the world at this time is probably at an unprecedented level. Like the amount of demonic possessions and things that are happening at this time seem to be off the chart. Maybe, it's hard to say, but seem to be off the chart because Satan knows the Messiah is here. So Jesus is going to empower his own disciples to cast out demons just as he has. Okay. Now, what's the difference between, because we think of them as the 12 disciples, and they were disciples, right? But they weren't just disciples, right? They were, it says, whom he called apostles. So why does he have all these disciples come up to the mountain, and then he picks out 12 and he says, you are my apostles? Now he's designating them as something different. Apostle and disciple is not the same, right? Apostle is sent one, yeah. So disciple just means a learner. That means as a disciple, you have found a rabbi that you believe has the message or whatever it is that you want, and you follow them to learn from them. It just means a learner, right? But the disciple has zero authority of the rabbi. They can't speak for the rabbi. They can't do anything. So just as a disciple, just means a learner, right? Just a disciple of somebody. Now, an apostle, though, apostle means sent one, a sent one, right? And a sent one is different. A sent one has the authority of the sender. It's a special title and position where the one who has the authority delegates their authority to the one who is sent. Therefore, the one who is sent is acting in place of the sender with the same authority. Does that make sense? Okay. And so what we have here is Darrell Bock says this. He says the Jewish concept of sending serves as the background for the use of this term, apostle. If so, then the representative acts as one with authority equal to the sender. The Mishnah, again, that's the Jewish rabbinic writings, they use this word, and this is how they use it. The Mishnah phrases the concept this way: the one sent by the man is as the man himself. The idea of representation also existed in the larger culture. Jesus names the 12 as his commissioned representatives here, as his apostles in the cultural sense, a title of great authority because of the nature of the one making the commission. So at this point now, he's done something very special. He's taking a group of many followers, disciples, including the 6 who right now he certainly has called them, and they are following him as disciples. He has now commissioned them officially to be his representatives on earth. Does that make sense? And given them his authority and power. In fact, when we get to Matthew 16, we're going to find out what that transfer is going to sort of look like, because Christ will actually sort of spell some of that stuff out, right? But as of now, he's called them to be his special representatives with his specific authority. All right, so before we go into the 12 apostles, questions or comments on what we've just covered? Very, very kind of, this is like a pivotal point here now of the troops been put together.
I see that it's talking in the present tense. They were to accompany him and he would send them out and give them authority.
Mhm.
So do they not have that authority yet?
No, once he commissions them, they have the authority. The accompanying starts right now. He won't immediately send them out so the picture is this. Let's say there's the 12 of you, and I just said, okay, you're all my apostles. I want you to be with me full time. That starts now. But until I actually send you out to say, hey, Gray, you and Rich go out and you go to this town over here and start preaching that part's still future. So the calling is immediate, the following is immediate, but sending them out, we'll get to that in just a little bit. That's the reason why that part's still future. Okay, they still got to learn.
What about like the authority to cast out demons? Is that also future?
They will have authority, and okay, let me just we'll hold on to just for a second, because you're going to find out when they try to do it, they get there's some failure. So we'll come to that. I don't want to spoil that, but yes, they will also be sent out. I mean, it's not going to immediately happen right there on the mountain, but in the future, they'll be sent out to preach. They will have authority over demons to cast them out, and they're going to stub their toe a little bit along the way, and Christ will have to give some corrective.
So,
Yes.
okay, the book of Revelation, 12 foundation stones, 12 pillars. There's a lot of 12s in there.
Absolutely. And that's what the number 12, it's just so symbolic. And you just sort of pointed out a few. So it's not just a randomness of that. Yeah, 144. Yeah, it's 12. Yeah, that's right. 12 times 12, right? Yeah. Yeah, if I can still do my math even this late at night.
I don't think they're officially, commissioned to go until Pentecost to the Holy Spirit.
No. He says to go to preach, and he's actually going to send them out to preach. Yeah. That commission is we'll get to that a little bit later on, but that commission is a more broad. For right now, their preaching is going to be internal in Israel. It will extend past that, obviously, with the Great Commission. And in fact, if the Great Commission isn't given, the church doesn't extend outside the borders of Israel. They're Jews. Why do you take that? This is where the Messianic kingdom is, where the representatives of the Messiah. This is where it's at. So the Great Commission is going to have an expansive effect, which is why Christ has to give them that, because if he hadn't given them, they would not have done that on their own. And in fact, the persecution of the church, one of the effects of the persecution of the church is a forced expansion of the gospel, right? So keep that in mind. All right. Yeah. Bob, hold on a second. Yeah.
The apostles, were they each one of them head of the tribe of Israel?
No. And in fact, that's something that people have asked before. And the answer is no, because we got 3 sets of brothers. So if they're brothers, they're all from the same tribe. So it's not as if one apostle was selected from each of the 12 tribes. It's the number 12 that's symbolic, but they are not from all 12 tribes, right? They're all Jews, yes. They're all 12 of them are Jews, yeah. No, he's not. His brother, so this gets really confusing. It's like having 8 Bobs in a room. Like which Bob are you talking about, right? No. Because remember, Jesus's brother James, or Jacob actually, isn't a believer at this point. He doesn't become a believer until after the resurrection. So the James here is the brother of John, not the brother of Jesus, although they are related. Sons of Thunder, yeah.
But as you pointed out, there are 3 sets of brothers, right?
Yes.
So is that like 4 each, or?
We'll get
We're
to
gonna
it.
get in that?
Yeah, we're gonna get to it. Yeah, just hold on. Yeah, just hold on here. And I want you to think about, we don't know exactly why the composition is, why it is. We don't know exactly why God chose those 12. We can make some guesses on a few of them, but I just kind of want you to put yourself in that place and ask, what value does it have in the people that he selected? Because I think we just look at 12 guys with names, half of them we don't know anything about anything other than extra biblical, like church records of what they did, but other than them being named, like once, I mean, you don't have any idea hardly anything else about these individuals. So the question would be, if you look at the structure, what value do you think God establishes by that? And I'm not saying I've got the answer. I'm saying it's a question that God doesn't do things just arbitrarily. So it's always interesting to figure out why he selected who he selected and what value that would be to Christ, either in his ministry or post-ministry. Yeah, Mike.
Speaking of selecting who he selected, was Miriam or Mary, the mother of Jesus, was she related to Elizabeth, the mother of John?
Yeah. Yes.
Sisters, cousins?
Yeah.
So Jesus and John.
So Jesus and John the Baptist, yeah.
And Jesus and James.
And Jesus is related to James and John. Tight group. This is just start thinking. I just want you to think about why things might be done the way that they're done. I'm not saying I got the answers. I just think it's an interesting thing to think about. All right. Let's go through the 12, right? I mean, some of them, some of them you're like, yeah, I remember reading that one time when I read the Bible when I was a kid, but we don't know anything else hardly about them other than they're being mentioned. The first one we have is Peter, right? Now, that's his English name, right? That's not how he would have been known, of course, to Christ and the rest of the disciples. His Hebrew name, before he was given a new name by Christ, remember, because Peter had a name and then Christ gave him a new one, was Shimon, right? Shimon Peres. You remember Shimon Peres, the what is it? Is it the president or prime minister? That's the prime minister of Israel, the one that I got assassinated. That's right. Shimon Peres, Simon, right? So in English, his name before Christ gave him a new name would have been Simon, right? Now he is given a new name by Christ, and it means it actually, well, it means it means rock, but it means pebble. It's a pebble, and we're going to get to that when we get to Matthew chapter 16, because there's a name for a rock, and it's not the name that Christ gives him. It does mean a stone, but it means a small pebble, right? So Peter's got the name of small pebble. Not big boulder, but small pebble. So in Aramaic, so it's Kepha or Cephas is Aramaic, and of course, translated into Greek, we get Petros, and which translates in English as Peter. All right, so that's the first one. Then we've got Andrew, which is the English form, and in the what we have here in the Greek is Andrei. Andrei is his Greek name. All right. We don't.
The brother of Peter.
He is the brother of Peter. Yes. Yeah. Yes. That is Peter's brother. In fact, it's Andrew that brings Peter to Christ. Yeah. All right. So John is the next one. And of course, that's the English version. The Hebrew, and I don't know why I didn't write Hebrew down there, is Yochanan. It would be his Hebrew name, Yochanan, which means Yahweh is gracious. And he is the son of Shulamit, which is Salome. And it has basically the same name as Solomon's wife, right? Pretty close to that in the Old Testament, but Shulamit, or Salome, and Zabdi or Zebedee, right? So John's mom is Salome and Zebedee, and we'll get to a little bit more information about that in just a moment.
Is this John the Apostle Jesus loved?
This is John the Apostle Jesus loved. This is the one who wrote the book of John, and he wrote 1st, 2nd, and 3rd. Well, most theologians believe he also wrote the 3 epistles, 1st, 2nd, 3rd John. Some think is the elder John. We won't get into that right now, but he at least is the one that it wrote the Gospel of John. And the book of Revelation. I don't want to leave that one out either. All right. Now, John is also the brother of James or Jacob, right? Which we get to next. So again, his brother is James, and his Hebrew name is Yaakov. Or Yaakov, and that just means Jacob. So he has the same name as Jacob, the patriarch, right? Yaakov, right? Now, you might say, how in the world, why don't we call him Jacob? Well, we actually should call him Jacob because his Hebrew name, and he was not given another name, is Jacob, right? So it really should be John and Jacob. Peter, John, and Jacob is what we should be saying. And by the way, if you wrote the Epistle of James, the Epistle of James shouldn't actually be called the Epistle of James. It should be called the Epistle of Jacob, because actually in the Greek it says Jacob. If you just go read the Greek and you read James, it's the Epistle of Jacob. It's not James, right? So anyway, if you want to. Yeah, well, we can get into sort of why the epistle has that name. But whenever you're going from different language to different language, Greek, Aramaic, Latin, whatever else, this is how we get from his name being Jacob all the way to, in English, we call him James. Right now, here's a distinguishing thing though, because when the New Testament will reference the patriarch like Jacob, they'll call him Jacob. But when it references James, they'll call him James, right? So what you see here, Fruchtenbaum says in English, this name was translated in 2 ways. When it designates the patriarch, it is rendered Jacob. For the apostles, it is translated as James, right? Because there's 2 apostles named James. But both of them actually had the name of Jacob. There wasn't any apostle that had the name of James, right? But when the translators, not the Greek text, not actually the written text, But when the translators translate the text, when they refer to the two Jameses that are apostles, or the two Jacobs that are apostles, they translate that as James, whereas they will leave the patriarch as Jacob. Okay, and it's just a translation decision. It's the only way to look at it. All right. Philip in English, or Philippos, Greek, and he just means lover of horses. So how he got that name, it's unclear, but that's his name. Nathaniel, which is what we call him in English, or Nathaniel in Hebrew, means gift of God. Now, this is where things get a little confusing, because sometimes he's called Nathaniel. Remember at the very beginning, right? When we're talking about John the Baptist and the whole story about Nathaniel there. And then sometimes he's called Bartholomew, right? And so you might think that there's two different people here, but they're not. Same person, right? Nathaniel or Bartholomew. And the reason why he has this is because his name is actually Nathaniel Bartholomew. It's like Randall Casper, right? It's like that's what his name is. Sometimes someone will call me, hey, Casper, come over here. Sometimes they'll say, hey, Randall, come over here, whatever. And how that's done is because those two, the Aramaic words, bar and Talmai, means just son of Talmai. And when you put it together, it's Nathaniel bar Talmai, which means Nathaniel Bartholomew. So you'll see one of both ways, right? So don't get confused on that one. All right, Thomas, English, is Toma in Hebrew, Didymus in Greek. So again, sometimes you'll see it referred to as Didymus. It's, it's just because they're using the Greek there at that time for that. And basically his name in Hebrew just means a twin. So he was a twin of somebody. We don't know if, if he has a twin brother, twin sister. We don't know if they were, fraternal. We don't know if they're identical to, who knows? We don't know exactly right, but he was a twin of somebody. And that's what his name is, right? It's Thomas. Okay, then we got Matthew. Again, that's our English version, but his Hebrew is Mattai. Now, again, this is also where there's some confusion, because the scriptures say that he's Matthew or Mattai. He's also called Levi, the son of Alphaeus. Now, Levi, we don't know whether or not his name was changed like Peter's. We don't have that account. But it appears, or at least what theologians theorize is this, is that prior to his conversion by Christ, when Christ called him from his tax collecting booth, he was Levi, son of Alphaeus, or son of Calphi. It's two different ways to spell that. And then post-conversion, when he decided to follow Christ, he changes his name, or Christ perhaps changes his name, although we don't have a record of that. Somehow his name gets changed to now being Matthew or Mattai, right? And so Mattai is just a form of the word that means the gift of God. So that's why theologians will suggest that perhaps when he was converted, he saw that as a great gift from God, that he had been accepted and could follow the Messiah. And so that's why perhaps either he chose it or maybe Christ gave him his name. We're not quite sure. All right. That's Matthew. All right. Now we got another James again. So this is where, again, the apostolic group here can be kind of confusing, because now we got a James, but this is not the same James. But again, it's still Yaakov, right? Or Jacob. But he is the son of Calphi. But in this case, he's not like Matthew. He's not related to Matthew, because Calphi in this case is a common last name. Like I put Jones or Johnson. I don't pick any last name here. So he's distinguished from James, who's the brother of John. So this is now James, right? The son of Calphi, or this that we have here. So not a lot known about this particular James. Like I said, we start getting to some of them that there's a little bit of obscurity about who they were and what they did, right? Then we get into number 10, which is Thaddeus. And it's interesting that his Hebrew name is Yehuda. Yehuda it's Judah. Yehuda. It's Judah. Judas is just the English form of Judah. That when we were naming my son, I wanted to call him Judah. My wife said, no, I prefer Jude. Same thing. Like, okay, Judah. So basically you have Yehuda. And so Thaddeus, his name is Judas. So you got two Judases here, right? But in the scriptures, they'll label him as Thaddeus, in distinction to the other Judas, who you don't want to ever get confused with, right? But both have the same exact name, Yehuda, right? Or Iodas in Greek. Now, this Thaddeus, or this Judas, is the brother of James, the son of Calphi, who we just talked about. So again, now we got two brothers here that are related. They're both the son of Calphi, right? One of them is James, and one of them is Yehuda or Judas. Okay. How do we get Thaddeus? Well, to die, and you take the word to die because that's his father's name, and he is called his real Hebrew name is what you see there, Yehuda or Judah, ben, son of Tadai, right? And so you got Judah, son of Thaddeus, because that's what Tadai equates to when you translate that from Hebrew into English, essentially. So this basically picked his father's name, kind of his last name. So now you're going to call him by sort of his last name, so to speak. Okay, that's Thaddeus. All right. Then we've got Simon the Zealot, right? And again, Simon, to distinguish him from the other Simon, who is who? Peter, right? Right? Okay. The pebble. So we've got this one, but he's called Simon, and there's a name, not just his name, but Simon the Zealot. Now, of course, the Zealot's not his last name. That's just a designation of what type of person that this guy was. I'll give you a little bit more about him in just a moment. So Shimon, again, same thing, Hebrew, Simon in English. Now, he was of the sect of the Zealots, and the Zealots were a member of the Pharisees, but they were like the ultra left wing, or the ultra, well, that's how they would have been known, the ultra left wing, the group of the Pharisees that basically opposed Roman rule, right? All the Pharisees opposed Roman rule, but not all the Pharisees would do something about it. Like, they wouldn't advocate for violence against that. But this group of zealots, they opposed the rule of Rome, and they actively encouraged others to do whatever they could to destroy the Romans. So they were the ones that would carry around the knives, and they would do assassinations in an attempt to overthrow the Romans. I'd say patriots. I mean, if you think about it this way, the Romans are invaders. The Romans have subjugated them. The Romans have treated them poorly. These are people that say, we're Jews, this is our land, and we're going to start a revolution to get our land back. They're patriotic. They're not killing for the sake of killing. They're killing because they want to drive Rome out of the land and regain it to be Jews, right? Now,
Barabbas would have been a zealot then. Barabbas,
Yep.
the one who exchanged places with Jesus to be set free.
well, I don't know that.
Because those the zealots were the ones, like you said, were fanatically against Rome. Would kill Roman soldiers.
We get to Barabbas. I think I wouldn't call it. He's not labeled as a zealot, so I wouldn't say that he's a zealot. I think he was probably just a downright dirty, murderous criminal. But for this guy right here, he is. So he's on the far side that says, we oppose Rome and we're going to kill every Roman we can until we drive them out. This is one of Christ's apostles, by the way. So you have a person here who's got a chip on his shoulder. You got a person here that's willing to die for what he believes in. And you got a person that frankly hates Matthew's guts. Yeah, because Matthew is on the very opposite. Matthew is the one that not only was fine with the Romans, but he actually got paid by them, and he loved it. He lived in the lap of luxury. So you've got one that likes to kill the Romans, and the other one that likes to serve the Romans, and they're both on his team. Okay, all right. So kind of keep that in mind. Yeah. Now these zealots, just so you know, these zealots, they are the ones that actually led the revolt against Rome in AD 67. And Rome then attacked Jerusalem for 3 years and finally destroyed it in 70 AD. So they're the ones that after the time of Christ's ascension they were responsible for getting the nation of Israel destroyed and the first dispersion of the Jews, right? So that's the branch that Simon the Zealot comes from, right? They were unsuccessful in ousting the Romans, although frankly, to be honest with you, they put up a darn good fight, if I can say that word here, sorry. They put up a really good fight, and the Romans, for a time, were concerned that they had lost control of the nation. So anyway, that's a totally different story for a different time. All right,
They're under rule of Herod Antipas, right?
who?
The, like, in Jerusalem, I guess.
Yeah, you've got Herod Philip, Herod Antipas. So in other words, you've got the land is divided up into different rulers over different areas, but that's all under it's all under the authority of Rome. They all get their authority from Rome. All right. Anyway, so that's who Simon the Zealot is. Now, let me just give you, let me just read you a few things here, because I want you to think about this. It's not just Simon the Zealot. Most Jews, other than some of the Sadducees, who actually liked the Greek influence and then the Roman influence, that there was, they actually in some ways thought that there was some benefit to the Roman occupation. Other than that, most Jews hated the Romans. Now think about that mindset there, because we look at it as the church. We're not really concerned about Jews and Gentiles and nationalities. We're thinking about the church. But here you have a group of 12 people that are Jews that have been subjugated under Rome. And what would their mindset have been to Rome as founding members of the church? Right? You've gone from being subjugated your entire life by an evil empire that's done horrific things to your people. How does that impact the spread of the gospel? How does it impact how you think? Because it should. And so I put some quotes here, and this is from Hengel in his book on the Zealots. And I just want you to sit back for a second, because it's not just Simon the Zealot, even though he was one that was willing to go out and murder people. Most Jews would have liked to have done what Simon was willing to do. Okay, so first one, it says this: Jesus's proclamation, again, proclamation about against. He's quoting here from when Christ is talking about the Pharisees. He says this proclamation about the Pharisees likely contains certain statements which, even though the Zealots are not named explicitly, are undoubtedly directed against views that were widespread in Zealot circles. His anti-Pharisaical polemic was probably, at least in part, directed against the Zealots as the most radical representatives of the left wing of the Pharisees. So when Jesus interacted with the Pharisees, some stuff he says is actually directed to that small portion of the Pharisees, right? And we'll get to some of that. We'll call some of that stuff out, right? So Jesus is actually saying, no, I'm not calling you for revolution here, right?
Kind of like what Trump said, march peacefully.
Well, Jesus, yeah, I mean, Jesus isn't even talking about, he's not asking them to do any marching, right? Because that's not the purpose. It's not the purpose of the new entity that he's going to introduce, which is the church. There's no national borders on that one, right? So he's got to get his apostles to start thinking not like nationalistic Jews, but as those who are going to spread the gospel to the entire world. But this is the mindset that they've got to work their way through. And even Peter has to be compelled by God to go to those Gentiles and preach to them. Remember? He tells God, no, I ain't going to do that. I've never touched anything like that in my entire life. Never, So I'm just putting this up here so that you can see that these aren't just men, 12 men, and we learn their names and we go around, whatever else. Like what Christ has to do to shape them, and Rich, to your point, to train them, to be the type of people he wants them to be, tells us a lot about us. Like we are all disciples that need to be trained so that we can be effective for the gospel. We all have, we have biases. We have things that keep us from ministering to people. There are certain people that we think aren't worth it. Not those. I'll go to that person over there because they're like me or whatever else. Like there's all kinds of things that as he tries to shape us, he's got to do that. So I just want you to think about what his job is, his task, Rich, of training the disciples over the next approximately 2 years to get them to be the type of people that can actually lead the church outside of nationalistic boundaries and be effective. Okay, so that's the first thing, right? Now, think about this one. Jesus himself was handed over to the Romans by the leaders of the Jewish people as alleged zealot, messianic pretender, and condemned and executed as such. So remember, when the Pharisees decide they want to get Jesus killed, what do? They make him a zealot. Oh, no, he's trying to overthrow Rome. What they're basically claiming is Jesus is part of the Pharisaic party of the zealots, which of course he's not. So as you start to see him against the Pharisees, speaking against the zealots, particularly, they try to switcheroo on him, and that because that's the only way that Rome will agree to kill him, is if he's a threat to Rome by claiming that he is a zealot. Okay, now think about this one here. The conflict within the early church about the Christian attitude towards the Roman state has to be seen against the background of the zealot struggle against Rome. Think about Romans chapter 13, 14, right? Paul has written this incredible gospel, and then he gets the practical outworking of it. And what does he say, Romans 13? You're to be in subjugation to who? The government. Who's the government? Dirty Romans. He's asking them to preach the gospel of the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ and not to hold it against the Romans for being Romans, right? So you see the change of heart that has to occur before they can be effective. If they're just going to stay nationalistic Jews and hate Rome, that gospel is going no place, right? So this is kind of what we need to see here. The significance of the unconditional commandment to love as the foundation of early Christian ethics is placed in absolute contrast to the idea of zeal for God in the violent sense, which appears only marginally in the New Testament, right? So I just wanted to kind of point that out with Simon the Zealot, because man, he brings in a viewpoint into the apostles, the group of the apostles. And man, that must have been some work that Jesus had to do to get that group shaped up. I'm talking about, like, I like to watch war movies and think about like war movies, and you get the green guys, they just come from some sort of training camp, right? They're the ones that are going to get you killed probably out on the battlefield because they don't know anything. Like this group of 12, there's some work that needs to be done before he can turn the reins over to them and they can do what he needs to do. All right.
Even right up to his death,
Oh, yeah.
right up to his death, Simon denies him.
Yeah.
Judas betrays him. So.
Yeah.
There's a lot of work that needs to be done, right up until the day he dies.
Yeah. But go ahead, Rich.
I don't want to go home and read the high priestly prayer. Kind of gives a new meaning to it, because he prayed for them, right?
Yes, you're talking John 14.
Yeah, John
Yeah.
14.
John 14, yeah. It does. And we're going to get to that. Why do you have to pray for them? Because these guys are knuckleheads. They're probably like the person you might see in the bar room on the weekends, like, punching each other or whatever. I mean, this is a diverse group. And I think one of you made the point is, like, look, God can take anybody. If he can take these guys and turn them into apostles that did incredible work for him, he can take you and I. Because these guys aren't anything special. He made them special. They didn't come to him special. He made them special, right?
And they all died, right? They all died.
Except for John. Well, church history says that John, they tried to boil John to death, and he survived being boiled in oil. And then so they tried to kill him, but apparently from church tradition, he was not able to die.
You were a band of brothers.
They were a band of brothers. I always like to think of things like that. Either sports,
when you-
sports or
when you
war,
watch
war
that movie,
metaphors.
You know?
Yeah.
And you think of that, you know, the types of group of people that were together and how, you know, how they, you know, how they related to one another. You know, until the point that they got in battle and they were on like a unified mission.
Totally.
But, you know, out of the battlefield, there was, you know,
In fact,
a little snarkiness.
in fact, Rich, I'm rewatching it for about the 10th time right now,
Yeah.
right? It's exactly what you get. There's some snarkiness, but boy, I tell you, by the time you get to the end, those guys would die for each other, right? And I haven't served. We've got a couple of people that have served, and you know exactly what that sounds like, right? You can translate that into something that's even more meaningful than what I can imagine. All right, let's get to the last one here for tonight, and we've got Judas. Now, his last name is not Iscariot, Judas Iscariot. That's not his last name, right? Probably not. It's possible, but probably not, right? Now, again, he has the same Yehuda, right? Just a slightly different variation, but it's the same thing, Judah. So you have two Judas in here, or two Judases in here in this apostolic group of 12, right? Again, he's got the name of the fourth son of Jacob, right? Remember, one of Jacob's sons was called Judas. We're the tribe of Judah, the line of Judah. That's this, Judah. And in fact, Jesus's name has a variation off of the same root word, right? Okay. So we have this Judas Iscariot. Now, his name, as you can see there in Hebrew, is Yehuda Ishkariot. Now, what does that mean? Was his last name Ishkariot? No, probably not. Ishkariot, actually, just in the Greek, just means a man from the town of Kriot. So, likely, the most likely explanation is that this is distinguishing Judas as not that Judas, but the Judas that's from Kriot, right? It's just a way to distinguish who he is because of the town that he came from. It's also possible that if you put those words together in Aramaic, it does mean tanner. So perhaps it's Judas the tanner. He might have been a tanner, like a worker in leather. It's possible. That same Kriot in Aramaic also as a root also has the idea of strangulation that's sort of tied in with that as well. So the third possibility is that it could be Iscariot or Kriot was given to Judas after he was strangled by hanging, right? So any of the three are possible. We don't know for sure, right? Okay, but likely his last name is not Iscariot, right? Okay, interesting little fact here. We've got a few more things here, and then we'll be done with this section here for tonight. Interesting fact that out of the 12, he's the only one that doesn't come from Galilee. Right. Yep, go ahead.
His replacement Matthias, was he from Galilee or from someplace else?
You know, I don't know that the text actually says where he was from. But again, if he's from Ishkariot, that's not in Galilee. So that's the reason why we know he's not a Galilean.
Is there a significance to him not being from Galilee? Like maybe an outsider, or I don't know.
Again, we don't know exactly why they were selected, but I think it is noteworthy that he appears to be a little bit of an outsider. You know, it's like we're all from Washington, then we got, you know, some guy from New York comes to join the band. You know, you're not quite from our particular area. I don't know if there's any significance, but I did want to point out he's the only non-Galilean, right, in the bunch. Now, interestingly enough, that this is what the rabbis said about the different ways of the different means by which someone could die, right? So this is in their writings. 903 species or ways of death were created in this world. In other words, the rabbis, remember, we talked about them numbering things, 33 ways to do this, 75 ways to hoe them all, you know, to hoe your field, whatever. I mean, they always had all these numbers of things, right? Well, they got 903 ways to die. What a great little list that they put together, right? So 903 species of death were created in this world. the worst of them is croup, and the easiest of them is the kiss. So death by kiss is the easiest one. And that's the route that Judas took to betray Christ. Death by kiss. All right. Now, what do we know about some of these disciples? Well, frankly, from the text, not much. I mean, we know about Peter, James, and John, and whatever else, and Thomas, but really some of these we don't know a whole lot about. What we have to do to find out the fate of the apostles, in fact, there's a great book out there by Sean McDowell, Josh McDowell's son, right? Sean McDowell. It's called The Fate of the Apostles. So if you actually want to go and say, what do we know from historical accounts? What happened to each one of these disciples? You're not going to find that in the New Testament, right? You don't find out about, I mean, we know that Paul is in prison, but we don't read about his martyrdom account, right? We don't read about the martyrdom accounts of most of these disciples, right? We've got Stephen, and so there's not a lot we know about. So if you want to know about the fate of the apostles, a great book, Sean McDowell, The Fate of the Apostles. Go read it. It's good. But what we do know from other sources as well, in this case, this is from the Jewish, the rabbis. The rabbis also in the Talmud, their writings did talk about some of the disciples as well. So it's not as if the disciples were figments of someone's imagination. They wrote about the disciples as well. We actually have this information about them from the Talmud. Fruchtenbaum says this: some of the names given in the Talmud, and I'm not going to quote the parts of the Talmud there, are similar to the ones in the New Testament. The first name listed is Mattai, which would correspond to Matthew. The second name is Nakai, which corresponds to Nicodemus. Again, Nicodemus was a disciple, but not an apostle, in English, and Nachdimon in Hebrew. The third name is Nezer, which does not correspond to any name and may simply be reflecting Nazareth or Netzeret, Nazareth in English, the town Jesus came from. Fifth name, Todah, corresponds to Thaddeus, right? So even within the Talmud, they talk about, and there's some extended things I just didn't put up here about how they died. They basically, just a summary of that. They stand before this Jewish court, and the Jewish court, basically says, actually each one of them say, are you basically, are you trying to kill me and whatever else? And it's a back and forth, and they get executed. And the next one comes up, and there's a dialogue that is recorded in the Talmud about how they died at the hands of the Jewish religious leaders. Okay, so a couple things here as we end for this tonight, just to think about this. Okay, we got 3 sets of brothers. I just asked that question again. Why would God do that, right? Simon, or Peter and Andrew, James and John, right? And remember, James and John, now their mother, Salome, she was the sister of Mary, right? So James and John's mother was the sister of Jesus's mother, okay? So that means they're cousins. James and John and Jesus are cousins. So Jesus selects 2 people here. He knows them, man. He's grown up with them. Why would he do that? Sometimes you need family. Like sometimes you need those people in your life that are indispensable, that he's probably horsed around with them. They probably wrestled. They've gone fishing over and over again. Like, I know I can count on James and John. They may be hot-headed. They may be emotional, whatever else, but I know these guys, right? So we've got James and John, cousins of Jesus, right? And he gave them the nicknames. There's 2 of them, Sons of Emotion or Sons of Thunder, right? What's that? Yeah.
Sons of Emotions.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, and then the third set is James and Judas, the sons of Alphaeus or Calphi, right? So you got 3 sets of brothers. Again, I think that there's some importance here. When you have an important thing that you're going to try to accomplish, if there is some unity, blood being thicker than water, I think there's purposefulness in what God did in this. He knows that this task is hard. And you need people you can count on. Who can you count on most? Even if you fight with them, even if you sometimes can't stand them, you know what you'll do? You'll stick up for family. Like, family matters.
So why wasn't James involved, the brother of Jesus?
He didn't believe in him. He didn't believe in him. In fact, we'll get to the point where he thinks he's crazy. Most of Jesus' family thinks he's crazy. They think he's lost it. They think he's going to get himself killed. If we don't step in, he's going to get himself killed. Like, that's why he doesn't believe in him. He thinks he's a nutcase.
Another thing too, John and Andrew, they were followers of John the Baptist.
Yes.
And so they qualified to follow Jesus, number one. And I think maybe that's another reason why he picked those two. He said immediately, he said, follow me.
Yeah. And there were many other that would have followed John the Baptist's instructions as well, but these two did, and they're the ones that followed Christ. Remember, Christ didn't select them; they followed him, and he turned like a rabbi would do and acknowledged, "You want to be my disciple, I accept you." But remember, they followed him. He didn't actually select them out of the crowd, so to speak, right? Not like Matthew. All right.
Which side? Black that you're off.
That's Simon Peter. That's Simon Peter. Yeah. Okay. So again, there's three apostles have the same name. So like this is going to get really confusing, gentlemen. If one of us doesn't change our name, we're going to be in a lot of trouble here. So that's why you can see some of these different spellings here. But you've got Simon Peter and Simon the Zealot. You've got James or Jacob, brother of John, and James, the son of Alphaeus. And then you've got the two Judases, Judas or Thaddeus and Judas Iscariot. So you've got, three people or, three groups of people that have the same name.
Who were Judas' brothers?
What's that?
If there were three sets of brothers, who were his brothers?
I don't know. You mean Judas Iscariot? I don't know. The Bible doesn't say anything about it. Like,
I thought it said that the 12 were made up of three sets of brothers. Yeah,
that's
up above there.
the three sets of brothers are up here. So Simon and Andrew are brothers. Yeah, the three sets of brothers. These ones just have the same names. They're not related. They just have the same names.
He was not, he was an outsider.
Yeah, he was announcing he was just not a Galilean. So yeah. Okay. All right. And then finally, let me just sort of wrap this up here. You got two slides and then we'll be done. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and Acts, which of course Acts is written by Luke, they give the list of the 12 apostles. Okay. So that's how we know who's in the apostolic group versus just being a general disciple. All right. And this is what Arnold says here. He says, altogether, there are 4 listings of the 12 apostles, which can be charted as follows. The first name, Simon, is the same in all 4 Gospels, while the second, third, and fourth names are mixed. The 5th name, Philip, is the same all the way across, while the 6th, 7th, and 8th names are mixed. The 9th name, James, the son of Alphaeus, is the same all the way across, while the 10th and 11th names are mixed. Judas Iscariot is always mentioned last and placed there because of his infamous deed of betrayal. What all this may indicate is that within the apostolic group of 12, there were 3 divisions. Each division had 4 disciples and a head. Simon was the head of the first division with James, Yochanan, John, and Andrew under him. Philip was the head of the second division with Bartholomew, Nathaniel, Matthew, and Thomas under him. And James, the son of Alphaeus, was the head of the third division with Thaddeus, Judas, the son of James, Simon the Zealot, and Judas, being Judas Iscariot, under him. So, because of the fact that every time the apostles are mentioned, you always have Simon mentioned first, you always have Philip mentioned 5th, and you always have James, the son of Alphaeus, mentioned 9th. Theologians look at that and they say there's too much of a pattern there to be random. So the idea is that within the group of 12, there are these subgroups headed up by Peter, right, by Philip, and by James, the son of Alphaeus. So it looks something like this, right? If you were to kind of look across all the 4 accounts of the 12 apostles, that's what you would get. Simon's always mentioned first, and then you can see that sometimes Andrew's mentioned next, sometimes it's James, Andrew, James. So you can see that 2, 3, and 4, they're all mixed up, right? Depending on what account it is. And then when you get to number 5, they'll put Philip as number 5. And then underneath Philip, that's all just mixed up. And then when you get to the mention of the 9th person in these accounts, it's always James, the son of Alphaeus. So if that theory is correct, and it seems more probable than not because there's too much of a pattern, then you've got a group of 12 that's really divided up into 3 groups of 4 men with a head of each division.
Well, once again, it just goes to show that God is not a God of chaos, but a God of
Order.
beautiful order.
Yeah, absolutely right. Yeah. Okay, so that's what's that?
One thing that's the problem is that Peter, James, and John. Really believe in that, Peter, James, and John are talked about as a unit a number of different times.
Yeah, they are, but again, they would be still within that first unit, leaving Andrew out. And why, so again, why Jesus chooses 3 out of the 12 to be like his closest, where they experience some things that no one else does. We don't exactly know, but again, now you've got the number 3 that comes up, and the scripture doesn't tell us, but certainly Peter, James, and John have a special part. Now, James and John make a ton of sense because James and John are Jesus's cousin. I mean, so that makes sense. Like, I know these people better than anybody else. Peter, he probably knew really well as well, because remember, Peter and Andrew were fishermen, and they were fishermen, and they either worked for James and John's father Zebedee in their fishing business. So they fished along with them, either as part of the business, or Peter and Andrew had their own business, but they worked together as a collective with James and John. So why Andrew isn't included, why he seems to get kind of shuffled out of that. It was certainly clear that Jesus knew Peter, James, and John better than probably any of these other ones, just because he'd grown up with at least James and John, and very likely had known Peter for quite a while. And Andrew. Yes.
If Luke wrote the book of Luke and the book of Acts, why would he write the lists in different orders?
That is a good question. I don't know honestly, I don't know the answer to that question, why he would write them in different order. I don't know.
One of the traits of Luke that, well, he's called a physician.
Mhm.
And so he wanted to be accurate in everything he wrote about. So nobody could say anything was false in there. So.
But he also wrote Acts too.
He also wrote Acts.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is that everything that he did, he investigated, he observed, and then wrote things down. He used people, the disciples, when we say, a lot of these things just really mesh up. Well, he used them as eyewitnesses because he wasn't an eyewitness. So he went back and interviewed all these people, and why he would have written it different. And in considering that he investigated, he observed, and he wrote things down. And being a doctor, he was very,
Messy with his handwriting. So
he was very particular in getting things right.
but it still doesn't answer the question, because he's the same author. So I guess my answer to your question is I don't know. I haven't actually been asked that, and I haven't looked into it, but that's a really good question. Just so you know, though, Luke and Acts are technically one book. The reason why it's broken up into 2 books is because the papyrus scroll isn't big enough. Like, basically, when you're out of enough, when you can only go so far, you have to stop that and you have to start a new papyrus scroll. So basically, Luke and Acts are meant to be read theoretically as one book by the same author. Right? Well, Luke came first. Okay.
So he was writing the letter to
Theophilus.
Theophilus.
Yeah, Theophilus. Well, we don't know if that's his name or not, but that's who it's addressed to. Whether it's a title or a name, we're not quite sure. Yeah.
Earlier, you mentioned that when Judas Iscariot was no longer there wasn't 11, they replaced Judas. So this list has 11. And they replaced him with Paul, right?
Well,
Matthias?
this, yeah, yeah, he did, yeah. Because remember in Acts 1:13, they haven't selected Matthias yet.
Okay,
So that the reason why you've got that there is Matthew, Mark, and Luke happened before Judas has died. That's why they've got a full listing. Acts 1:13 is before they've selected Matthias to replace Judas. So you've got 11 listed. Yeah. Okay, so we're going to end it there tonight. And what I would like to do is I'd like to just leave you with a benediction, right? As we leave here. So this is the benediction. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Peace there is shalom. Does anyone know what shalom means? Peace, but it means more than just peace. It means God's peace, perfect peace. It has the connotation, in fact, shalom is the greeting that you, if you're a Jew, shalom. What shalom means, it has a very broad meaning to it. It means may God's blessing and may God's peace rest upon you. And what that peace means is peace with God and peace with your fellow members. In other words, may you be at complete and total peace in every area of your life. It's a very comprehensive meaning of that particular term. So as you go tonight, shalom, go in peace. Come back next week. Shalom. Thank you, everyone.
What, rock and roll, what was that from that, isn't that one of Paul?